Evening. I'm Dr. David Rowan, and I'm the immediate past president of the New York County Psychiatric Society.
And I'm Dr. Patricia Westmoreland, president of the Colorado Psychiatric Society. Thank you so much for joining us.
So Patricia and I have had a chance to meet virtually for other educational programs during the last year, but we never imagined that we'd be doing our annual meetings together online like this. But here we are again tonight, combining forces to bring us all together for this special meeting.
You're right, David. I never thought that we would be doing something like this, not in a million years. And yet I think we've all learned during the COVID-19 pandemic that we have to count our blessings and be thankful for the opportunities that we have. And speaking of being thankful, we are also thankful for the support of our partnering organizations, the Denver Medical Society, the Department of Psychiatry at the University of Colorado Anschutz Medical Campus, and the Colorado Medical Society. In addition, we greatly appreciate the support of our exhibitors. CPS members, please remember to participate in an exhibitor challenge that was emailed to you so that you can be entered to win a $300 donation to the charity of your choice.
So tonight we are thrilled to have AMA President and psychiatrist Dr. Patrice Harris with us to discuss COVID-19 and answer your questions live in the second part of this meeting. But first, I'm honored to introduce Dr. Richard Friedman and Gary Gulman, who will discuss Gary's comedy special, The Great Depresh, which shows that you can be funny even as you are insightful and reduce stigma about mental illness. Dr. Friedman is a New York Times op-editor. He's also professor of clinical psychiatry and director of the Psychopharmacology program at Weill Cornell Medical College. He's an expert on the neurobiology and treatment of mood disorders. Gary Gulman is a New York City comedian who was a finalist on the NBC reality talent show Last Comic Standing and has released a number of comedy specials, including in 2019, The Great Depresh on HBO. We're pleased to welcome Dr. Friedman and Gary, but first, a quick word from Platinum partner PRMS, whose support helped make this night possible.
I have no idea how this is going to go. Is it possible that this subject isn't even funny?
It was a long time since I shot my last special. I got very sick with the Depresh. I grew up in the 70s, and the only antidepressants we had access to was Snap Out of It and What Have You Got to Be Depressed About? That was the second leading brand of antidepressant.
Happier kid you couldn't find. Always had a smile on his face. So how could I detect anything?
This is a book I wrote in second grade. It was called The Lonely Tree. And to anybody with a small amount of psychology knowledge, you would know this was a cry for help.
But I know my Depresh is in remission.
And I'm only comfortable talking about it now because I have come out the other side.
I wanna be your rock.
Therapy saved my life. I believe I broke my therapist. Yeah, I was leaving his office and I was shutting the door and I heard him go.
Some days you'll feel great.
It's interesting because millennials take so much flack from middle-aged men talking about participation trophies. Their argument is, how are they going to learn how to lose? How are they going to learn how to lose? Oh, they'll get some practice. Are you familiar at all with life?
Take it as it goes. take it as it goes.
Hi, Gary.
Hi, Dr. Friedman. It's nice to see you.
It's nice to see you. So where are you?
I'm just outside of Atlanta, Georgia, with my wife and her family, and we are quarantining and maintaining our moods and sanity. So we're very grateful.
Yeah, that's good. So you've been well, and
Yes.
today as well.
Yes.
And how about comedy?
Well, I have been writing a book, so I am my only audience right now. So after the Great Depresh, there were a number of publishers who wanted to see if I had an idea for a book, and I had an idea for a book that I had put together a proposal for in the midst of a depressive episode, and as the depressive episodes are wont to do, it robbed me of my confidence to actually go out and pitch it and share it. I was very insecure about it, and then during the time that I am healthy, I was able to pitch it to various publishers, and so the idea is sort of a memoir of my experience from kindergarten through 12th grade. I have a knack for remembering very many details and experiences and stories from my childhood for some reason. I don't know if that's common amongst the depressed, but I have an uncanny memory from my childhood. So that's what I've been working on, and that's kept me occupied, and I'm grateful for the timing of that, because it motivates me to have a deadline and to have interest in my project. So I have an editor that I work with closely, and so that's been a godsend during this.
Yeah, because when you're in quarantine, you can't do stand-up comedy unless you want to do it virtually.
Right. Now, I'm not comfortable with that. I'm so dependent on the audience for my timing and for my confidence. So it's difficult to do it virtually, and I become, even during interviews, sometimes I become self-conscious and concerned about how I'm coming off. So the nature of stand-up comedy is troubling, because you are so dependent on the immediate feedback for so much of it. It's a major component. So in absence of that, it's very difficult to do it well or feel that you're doing it well.
Yeah. I would imagine that you can't. People argue a lot about whether virtual connection, like the kind that we're having right now, is in fundamental ways equivalent. How close does it come to actual connection? That's one-on-one. But if you're doing, a performance of comedy in which you're interacting with a group, I could imagine that can't even be close.
Right. Yeah, I imagine that too. I haven't tried it, and I'm holding out. But one thing that I was interested in is the nature of, or maybe the effect of laughter and humor on moods, because I'm just going empirically, and I'm a sample of one, but I know that throughout my life, getting laughs or laughing with people has given me of course I can't track this, but it feels like a shot of chemistry that lightens my mood and gives me energy. And I know that we've discussed the impact that even the short exchanges at the grocery store or with the librarian that you have can release some I think dopamine or some endorphins, and I know that one of the major components of my recovery was your insistence or encouragement to just go be with somebody, just get out of the house, drag yourself out, have people drag you out, make plans and keep them. And I think those were the first initial steps, incremental, of my recovery, because you know, when I first started on this journey towards the Great Depresh, I was borderline catatonic and spending so much of my time isolated, and even in that state, I followed your directions and forced myself to sit quietly with a friend who lived nearby, and a lot of times we wouldn't even speak for hours, but I know that each time I did that, invariably I felt better when I got home that night from that, and on a number of levels it was helpful.
That's a remarkable observation, actually, and it's hard to use that information when you're feeling bad, because intuitively the depression makes people feel, as you said, like socially isolated, and you don't anticipate that things will be pleasurable. But you took it literally like a medical prescription, because I said, you know, you must be with people,
yes.
And the point is not that you'll enjoy it initially, and in fact, it can do you good even if you don't feel in the moment that it's pleasurable. But also your observation that when you were down and you did comedy and you would go in and do a performance and get a response, and you would laugh and people would laugh with you, that actually changed your mood. And it was also true that, you know, there was a diurnal variation, so that, you know, later on in the day you did feel better. It was just part of the rhythm of depression. But even when you were thinking about comedy and you were planning it and you were sketching out in your mind, you know, what was going to happen, that had an effect on you. It was positive. And it brings to mind this bigger question about, well, you would always argue when you were depressed, you know, when I feel better, then I'll do these things. When I feel better, I'll see my friends. When I feel better, I'll socialize. And I would always tell you, yes, that's true. But it also goes in the other direction, that if you do those things, you will also feel better, even though you don't feel like doing them. And it's counterintuitive. You know, you believed me, but you didn't feel it was true.
Right.
You had to see it for yourself.
Yes, and just the inertia was so helpful, so that the getting out of the house would lead to more getting out of the house, and would lead to a better mood. Now, that the interesting thing is that we've talked a lot over the past few years about the pharmacological, pharmaceutical, or the medicine that I took, and I don't know how specific they want us to get on this, but the approach was to attack it from a number of different angles, and I think that is sort of an analogous to how we attacked it outside of the medicine, so that we attacked it with 2 different pills, and then there was an exercise component to it. I mean, the thing with exercise is people think they need to jog for even 2 miles to have any effect, and I was convinced of that. I said, I don't have the energy to do 2 miles. I will do no miles. And the truth is that even a long walk has a significant impact on my mood, and at the very least, a lot of times it would relieve me of the guilt of not exercising and not doing anything, and again, incrementally. So I started off with these long walks, and then I would jog whenever the light was a walk sign. So I would jog to the next block, and if it was a walk sign, I would continue, but it was never more than 2 blocks of actual jogging, and there was a lot of waiting for lights, and that was so helpful. I think the nature of the depression is you think it's never going to end, you want it to end immediately, and there's nothing in between, and discovering the in between was crucial. And this wasn't my first episode, it was just my longest and deepest, and I feel as though my recovery is stronger and the foundation is stabler because of the approach we used and how many different components there were to the recovery.
Yeah, it's wonderful to hear that, and it is, and I think you're right, it is enduring because it's strong, and you're getting better involved so many different things that you changed in your life, and those things remain with you. They're habits. So you learned that, yeah, if you just took a pill, it would have a limited effect. It had a positive effect, but it didn't do everything. When you increased your social contact and you started working more and exercising, all things that you control, that you have some power over and made a part of your life, you started to feel dramatically better. And when you took time off and you went and you stayed at home, with your mother and got away from the pressure of work when it was too great, that too had a really positive effect. But I have to say, along the way, one thing that just struck me was your remarkable stamina and resilience. So even when you didn't feel like something would work, you would try it anyway. So the ability to take yourself in hand and say, okay, I know I don't feel good about this and I don't want to do it, and Friedman says I should do this, right? I'm going to do it. Tremendous amount of discipline was involved, and a lot of hard work. It's easy to do something when you feel energized and you feel like you want to go exercise because you know it's going to feel good. But I was amazed that when you were feeling so depressed, you could use that advice and actually carry it out, because it's not so easy to do it.
Right. I think there were two things that helped. I honestly I couldn't have done it without the bump that the medicine gave me to just get me to a level where I could fight back and where I could just maintain some energy. The other thing, and I think it was my favorite part of the Great Depresh special and the documentary, is that I was very fortunate. This was the first episode where I had a partner, my wife, who was a participant and an advocate and came with to every meeting we had. And the thing is, when you're very depressed, a lot of times you don't have the confidence or you don't remember to ask questions. And she also did lengthy research on treatments and on ideas, and would bring them up when I was embarrassed or didn't want to bother you with ideas. And also, to your credit, you didn't dismiss any of them out of hand and say, well, that's cockamamie, or that's not proven, or anything like that. You were very, very thoughtful in your responses, and it was so helpful. So I tell people that the MVP really of the whole story, along with you, was Sade, my wife, and she just was so strong. And a lot of people don't recognize that there's another victim of the depression, and that's our partners, that they suffer along with us, and they can't often get their hopes up. And it was interesting because she was even more, I think, trepidatious than me when I decided to do the Great Depresh, because she was concerned that if it were to not live up to my hopes and expectations, that I would have a setback. So she was very protective of me. And when we started to work on the project, she was very insistent that we take it slowly and that I not invest too much of my my self-esteem and my mood in this project. And she was an excellent governor of my expectations and my hopes. So that was just so helpful to have somebody with me. I had never done that. I had never wanted to share the burden, I guess. And it was another reason why I think the recovery is so strong.
Yeah, she was remarkable, is remarkable, and she was relentless and resourceful. You know, I didn't realize at times that she was distressed herself, because she came in to every meeting with observations about even small changes that were positive that you might not have noticed, to encourage you. And then she'd done all this research, and many of them were very interesting ideas I didn't know the answers to. You know, new treatments, possibilities that other kinds of things would work. And being a pragmatist, you know, and I once said to you, look, I mean, if standing on your head 30 minutes a day and eating chocolate pudding would make you feel better, I would prescribe it. You know, she was remarkably resourceful and never gave up. I mean, no matter how bad you felt, she always thought it was possible to have, you know, some improvement, and that you should just stick with it. And I think you're right. Having somebody with you to share this is critical. And, you know, I could not tell throughout most of the sessions what the toll was on her, because she was so upbeat and so remarkably positive. It wasn't obvious.
Yeah, she's incredibly strong and a fighter. Related to that, I had always wanted to ask you this, because there was a period where I told you, because I'd moved back to Massachusetts, and we had kept in touch, and I had started on a new medicine regimen when I moved back, and within almost in lockstep with when we expected it to show any effect, it started to work, and it expanded my waking hours and gave me some energy. And I sent you an email and told you that it was working and I was feeling better. And we had a couple of conversations by phone and through email over the next few months. And then I moved back to New York about 6 months into the recovery. And so, or rather 9 months, it probably took 3 months before I started to feel myself, and then another 6 months till I moved back to New York from there. I think, whatever the timing was, I remember going to you and saying that HBO wanted to make a special and documentary about the work I had done in recovering and the jokes I'd written and the stories I was telling about it. And my question was always, at any point, did you think to yourself, oh my word, this guy is deluded, and his illness now includes delusions of grandeur and false hopes, and HBO is making a documentary. Okay, we'll go along with this. But it just seemed to me like I was, it sounded crazy even to me.
No, the thought never occurred to me.
That's so nice
because
to
you were
hear.
No, because you were an accomplished comedian and you clearly weren't delusional. And I think maybe the thought reflects the fact that it was such a grand departure from feeling depressed, to have such a wonderful opportunity that you could hardly believe such a thing could be real, because you had been you had been so down that no, I saw it as a a fitting recognition of your accomplishment. And no, never occurred to me that you were delusional.
Okay. It just was such a dramatic turnaround, because less than a year prior, I was hospitalized and at my wit's end regarding this, and then it was just, to me, a miraculous turnaround that even in my wildest dreams, I thought someday I'll be able to function the way I am capable and I will reach my potential, but to be able to share the odyssey, really, and I mean that in the Homeric way, that I battled cyclopses and other monsters in this journey, and to come back on the other side and tell the tale. It felt and I felt from the very beginning that the project was blessed if only I shared the story with my live audience, but to share it at the level of mass media was truly a blessing and a gift. And yeah, I'm grateful. And also I thought my favorite part, along with including my wife and my dog, was that I got to include you in the special, and because I think one of the things that I was proud of regarding the Great Depression is that I think that and the feedback I'm proudest of is the people who are being educated by it, that are learning what their friends, their family, their coworkers go through. When they say, I'm depressed, that's why I was out for a week of work, or that's why I didn't come to your birthday, they now can put it with someone who is giving an explicit list and a discussion on the nature and the symptoms of depression. Because I remember reading Darkness Visible by William Styron, and him talking about the limits of the English language regarding the word depression, that it's the same word you use for this crippling, deadly disease is the same word people will use when the New York Knicks or the Boston Celtics lose a playoff game. I was so depressed, and it's just that the people don't mean to be undermining, but they don't understand. It doesn't have a disease sounding name, and so that's difficult. And the people have told me that they've been able to watch our scene together and see what a session looks like, and to see what goes on. And I mean, the only lie about that session was that your office isn't that expansive, and I think you deserve that big of an office, but there wasn't enough room for cameras in your office. But I've been so happy that people have said they've watched it with their family, and they say, this is what I went through. And the other side of it is, and especially in our session, we see that the family is a major contributor to recovery, and can give us huge leverage in recovering. And if Sade had not been as tenacious, I think the episode may have lasted longer, and certainly wouldn't have been as manageable.
Right. Gary, I think that what you did by making that movie, aside from the fact that it's a wonderful movie and it's full of very wonderful memories and it's funny and it's entertaining, it is a profound form of education for the public about depression. And you will have no idea, not just of how much better you've made people feel by destigmatizing it and talking about it openly, but you probably will never know how many lives you saved, literally. Because people will see this and they'll say, oh, this is actually a illness with these symptoms that causes these, that has this impact on life along these lines. And it's treatable, that people who feel really sick and barely can function as a result of bad depression can do just what, well, they may not have your talent, but they can function and they can get better and they can recover and go on to live productive, creative, fulfilling lives. That is a gift to have done that.
Thank you. Thank you.
I mean, and it's a huge boon for public mental health. You know, they can hear, you know, I can tell them, you know, public until they're blue in the face, you know, an expert, but actually you are the proof, meaning the proof is in the pudding. And that was quite a pudding you made.
Wow, thank you. Thank you. That's so nice to hear.
It always occurred to me from what you said that being able to laugh, no matter how you felt, could even take somebody who is feeling sad and depressed and make them feel better. And since you've had depression on and off for so long, when you first thought about comedy in your life and you made the decision to become a comedian, how did you see this in its relationship to depression? Did you think of it as a form of self-treatment?
Well, I think I knew that when I made a small group of people laugh, I felt excellent. And maybe it was just feeling the way everyone feels, or that the people who are not afflicted with depression and anxiety feel, that they feel accepted and they feel worthy and clever or smart, or just have confidence. It always gave me confidence when I was making people laugh. It made me feel like my brain was a clever machine, and that it could bring about laughter. And I don't know whether it's accurate, but I often felt like people, when I was making them laugh, that they liked me and accepted me. And so I think my depressive symptoms probably started when I was 7, but I could always either distract myself from my negative thoughts by watching comedy, which I did obsessively, or listening to it back then, a lot of cassettes and albums. And then I noticed that I felt very good about myself when I was making my friends laugh, especially in high school and college. And it was exhilarating. And I think that the questions I had when I first started to pursue it as a vocation, and I wish I had just pursued it as something that made me feel really good every time I did it. But I'm an ambitious person, and I said, well, if this makes me feel good 2 nights a week, why don't I do it 7 nights a week and try to make it my business? And that is when the depression was limiting, because I would often allow my mood to be dictated by the audience's response, or by how I was writing during the day. If I couldn't come up with something, I would say, oh, I'll never get it. And it was dangerous. It was a dangerous approach, and it wavered. My confidence wavered quite a bit over the years, until I found a quote by Samuel Beckett about failure, in which he said, basically, I mean, I know it by heart. Ever tried, ever failed, no matter. Try again, fail better. And my mantra, especially during the recovery, was fail better. Go on stage, talk about your depression. If no one laughs, it's just it was expected. You risked something, you failed, that's fine. Tomorrow you will improve a sentence or a word, and it will be better. And you are not what I was like the athlete who's only as good as his last game. And that was so important to take away the insecurity and the very variable audiences that I had no control over. When I said it's okay to fail and just try to improve the next time, that was as helpful as the exercise and the sort of the cognitive behavioral therapy type of approach that I was doing. But again, it took me over 40 years to figure that out, or 25 years in comedy. But it was the bane of my education as well, in that I would get a great grade, I would feel good, I would have trouble learning a new concept, and I would beat myself up, and that is very dangerous for a sensitive mind. One more component I just wanted to address is that there was a setback when I lost my dog. My youngest dog died, and I was very upset. And I remember at first I was contemplating writing it out and just accepting this as grief, but I noticed, and I was sensitive to it, that this wasn't regular grief. This involved a lot of blaming and a lot of what ifs and a lot of self-abuse, and I wish I had done this, and it became more than regular grief. And instead of waiting until our next session after a month or whatever our frequency was at the time, I called you, and we met within 24 hours or 48 hours. You said, we have some room with one of your medicines, let's increase it. And within 4 days, the extra 20 milligrams was a game changer. I was still grieving my dog, but I wasn't having the depressive symptoms associated with it. And I know that 5 or 10 years ago, I would have waited the month to not bother anyone. And I think that was so helpful, and the right approach, the proper approach to treatment and recovery.
Well, Gary, it's great to see you feeling so well.
Same here. And I always look forward to, even at the worst, I always look forward to our meetings, because I always came away with hope and an approach and a game plan. And I am so grateful for your expertise and talent, and as well as your demeanor was so encouraging and so uplifting, and we always look forward to going to see you, and still do. So thank you.
It's a pleasure, Gary.
Thank you.
I'm so glad you're feeling well.
Me too.
So be safe and stay well, and I'll talk to you soon.
Okay, thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Good evening. I first want to thank the joint virtual annual meeting chairs, Dr. Tricia Westmoreland, a fellow home landsman from South Africa with me, and Dr. David Rowan from New York, for doing this wonderful collaboration between two very important district branches. So thank you very much. I'm honored here today to introduce my friend and colleague, APA former board member and president of the AMA, our speaker tonight, Dr. Patrice Harris. Dr. Harris is a renowned child and adolescent psychiatrist from Atlanta. She is the 174th president of the American Medical Association and the first African-American woman to hold this position. As a private practice physician, public health administrator, and patient advocate, Dr. Harris has been a leader, an active leader in organized medicine for her entire career. She has served on the AMA's Board of Trustees since 2011 and also served in the position as chair of the Board of Trustees. She has also served as the AMA representative and chair of the Opioid Task Force since its inception in 2014. Beyond the AMA, Dr. Harris has held numerous positions of leadership, both within the American Psychiatric Association, the Georgia Psychiatric Physicians Association, the Medical Association of Georgia, and the Big Cities Health Coalition. A distinguished fellow of the American Psychiatric Association, Dr. Harris currently consults with both public and private organizations in service delivery and emerging trends in healthcare. She's an adjunct professor at the Emory Department of Psychiatry and Behavioral Sciences and an adjunct clinical assistant professor in psychiatry and behavioral sciences at the Morehouse School of Medicine. Dr. Harris is a West Virginia native, and she earned her MA in counseling psychology and MD at West Virginia University. It was during this time that her passion for helping children emerged. She completed her psychiatric residency and then did 2 fellowships, the first in child and adolescent psychiatry and then the forensic psychiatry fellowship at Emory University School of Medicine. I'm sure many of you have seen her on MSNBC, CNN, Fox, and other channels, as well as a spokesperson for the AMA on COVID-19 pandemic. Her knowledge as a former health director adds to her value as she speaks for all of medicine and the safety of every patient, healthcare providers on the front line, and all the staff working in the hospitals and the first responders on the patients that have COVID-19. We're especially excited to hear the specific ways of responding to mental health needs of physicians and the public in this time. Thank you for speaking on this timely and important topic, Dr. Harris. With that, it is my great pleasure to welcome AMA President, Dr. Patrice Harris.
Well, good evening, Saul, and thank you, Saul, for that very generous introduction. I certainly have treasured you as a friend and a colleague over the many years of my involvement with both the APA and certainly now the AMA. And thank you for allowing me to be with you tonight, even virtually. Yes, I'm sure everyone sort of says this is not what we planned, but certainly it is an honor to be here with you. You know, we're learning a lot, right? We're doing things differently in the midst of this COVID-19 pandemic. And I think it's great that we have Colorado and New York coming together to really share and learn during this time of the COVID-19 pandemic. Certainly the COVID-19 pandemic presents us with a challenge that we have not faced in decades, but I am confident. I was confident before COVID-19, and I remain confident now that we as a profession will continue to lead and do the work that we need to do right now, but also the critical work that we will need to do after we get through the acute phase of this pandemic. So let me start tonight. Let's start. I have a PowerPoint. It won't be too long. And then, of course, we'll have time for questions at the end, again, if time allows. I have been talking a lot about physician leadership, and it is critically important and even more evident now during this COVID-19 pandemic. So I want to talk a little bit about what leadership looks like and what we are doing at the American Medical Association. Now, certainly, about 25 years ago, time flies, members of the Psychiatry Section Council, and that includes, of course, representatives from APA, from ACAP, and from Apple, got together in a ballroom in Chicago at an AMA meeting, and we discussed how we could continue to advance psychiatry and psychiatrists in the overall House of Medicine. I know that we all are aware that for so many years, psychiatry, issues around the mental health of our patients, issues around our specialty was seen as other or over there and not as a part of medicine. And so we began to have that conversation, but more importantly, we developed a plan, a strategic plan. And our goal was to certainly have more psychiatrists in leadership within the House of Medicine there at the AMA. And from that plan, I think that by any metric, people would say we've been successful. We've had folks on all of the councils of the AMA, Jack McIntyre, Lou Krause, had me on the Board of Trustees. We had many on our AMA's Council on Long Range Planning. But of course, we also wanted to make sure that we worked hard to get a psychiatrist from the Section Council as president of the AMA. And I have to say, certainly it's been my honor and privilege to have worked with my colleagues over the year and have been elected president of the AMA. I will have to say we cannot let this time pass without acknowledging a previous president of AMA from Colorado, Dr. Jerry Lazarus, certainly paving the way first as Speaker of the AMA House of Delegates, but then as president. So this is about us working together and collaborating. But I have to say that I think by any metric over the years, all of us, all of the psychiatrists, and that includes you, because many of you support your colleagues and your delegates, both in states and in your national specialty societies, to come together with our colleagues in the House of Medicine and make policy. And if you look at the policy finder of the AMA, you can be assured that there is policy addressing and the many needs of psychiatrists in our profession and the patients that we serve. And again, my honor and privilege to be, I believe, the third psychiatrist, first child and adolescent psychiatrist, I believe, and the first African-American woman to be president of the American Medical Association. In an address that I gave to the House of Delegates last November, I talked about the importance of trust. And I talked about the fact that, unfortunately, trust was eroding and has been eroding in a lot of our institutions in this country, right? People don't have the same trust that they used to in so many institutions, but when they do surveys, people still trust us, their doctors. And the reason they trust us, and I talked about these 4 dimensions of trust, and that's because we demonstrate and are committed to these 4 dimensions of trust. First of all, especially when it comes to healthcare, and I think let's broaden this to the current pandemic, patients want us to be competent. They expect us to be competent, and we work hard at that through all of our years of training and our commitment to being lifelong learners. So competence is truly an important dimension of trust. The next is honesty, or as my grandmother used to say, truth-telling. You know, we often have to share bad news with our patients. And so we are used to that in the course of our day-to-day lives. And I believe that physicians also have been, and certainly at this moment in time, and it will be the same going forward, need to stand up and tell the truth. About a month ago, I gave an address via the National Press Club regarding the importance of science and evidence and the facts. And the fact that, of course, we are in a public health crisis right now, and that requires public health leadership. We certainly have to make sure we, as physicians, we need to make sure that our scientists, our researchers, our public health professionals have the ability to tell the truth without fear of retaliation or retribution. And so we will, and I hope that I have on TV, as Saul mentioned, been tangible representation that throughout the midst of this crisis, we have to make sure we tell the truth. The next is compassion. Certainly, folks want us to care about them. And we do as physicians, and we demonstrate that as physicians. And that, of course, is another important dimension of trust. And finally, purpose. People talk about purpose-driven lives. People often have said to me over the last couple of months, "You're very busy." But actually, I like to say I'm very purposeful. This has been, again, a wonderful opportunity to have the platform to focus on and ensure that our nation focuses on science and the evidence and the facts. And I would say that has certainly been my purpose over the last several months. Unfortunately, there's so much misinformation and disinformation out there, and it grows every day. I like to say I spent the first 2 weeks of this pandemic really not in my role as president of the American Medical Association, but in my role as a friend and a family member, dispelling the myth that African Americans could not become infected with COVID-19. So that is another opportunity and leadership opportunity for all of us to make sure that we are credible, trusted sources of information. Again, that was the case pre-COVID-19. It is certainly the case now, and it will be the case after we get through the acute phase of COVID-19. In my inaugural address last year, last June, in fact, my year is almost over as president, but I talked about wanting to accomplish 3 things during my presidency. Of course, all of the other work that we do as physicians and all of the other strategic priorities of the AMA, but I wanted to use my platform to amplify 3 things. And the first was to integrate mental health care into overall health care. Again, the need to have everyone appreciate that. That's something that most folks in this room today, viewing today, know, but we needed to certainly amplify that. Now, I've worked on that a lot. We all work on that day to day, but here we are in the midst of this COVID-19 epidemic, and we see a critical, much needed focus on mental health. And so again, it will be our charge, our challenge, not only as we are doing, meeting the needs or partnering with others to meet the needs of mental health in the midst of this pandemic, but to make sure that the conversation continues. I know you all know, and we do this in this country, in the midst of a crisis, we are all hands on deck. But too often, I would say, after the crisis subsides, people go back to business as usual. So we will have to make sure, hopefully, again, with this pandemic shining a light on mental health and the mental health needs, of course, of our colleagues, and we've all seen that day to day, those on the front lines particularly, but also the needs of the public. We will have to make sure that conversations continue about that so that we are beyond the decades of woefully inadequate funding for the mental health infrastructure in this country. The next thing I wanted to amplify, of course, was the need for diversity in the physician workforce. Again, as an African-American woman, it has been my honor as I've traveled around this country for so many young people to say that because they are seeing me in this position, they believe that they can aspire to leadership. They believe that they can aspire to careers in medicine. But again, that is just the first piece of the work, and we have to continue. And why is diversity of the physician workforce important? It's important in the service of health inequities. And I don't need to tell this audience, another spotlight is shining brightly on health inequities in our country. And so we have seen, of course, Black Blacks in this country, members of the Latinx community who are suffering disproportionately, particularly when it comes to hospitalization and deaths regarding COVID-19. And so again, a bright light is shining at this moment. The question is, will we answer the call and be able to continue to address some of the issues? We all know about the social determinants of health. Are we ready to have those conversations about more difficult conversations, to be sure, about the structural determinants of health, about housing inequality, about lack of access to health care, about discrimination, implicit bias, and racism? So again, that was another area that I wanted to highlight, and certainly this COVID-19 pandemic is amplifying that issue even more. And the last thing I wanted to amplify was the issue around childhood trauma. The impact, as a child psychiatrist, something that I see in my practice every day. And we've seen some conversation, increasing conversations around that over the last several years, but we have to make sure we continue to amplify that. And here we are in the midst of this pandemic, and certainly people are talking about trauma, acute trauma now, and what implications does what we are going through now have on the development of PTSD much later. So again, certainly I know people tease us as psychiatrists and wonder if we can see the future, and of course we cannot. But I will tell you that it's been an opportunity to, again, even further amplify those issues that I wanted to amplify during this pandemic. So let's talk a little bit about what AMA is doing. Certainly we wanted to build a foundation and make sure that first and foremost we are seen as a credible, trusted leader, offering credible, trusted information. I talked to you earlier about the national address that I gave about the importance of science and evidence and facts. And I don't know about you, but among a lot of people, not everyone, unfortunately, we are hearing those three words a lot: science, evidence, and facts, particularly among the media. That's one of the areas we called on in that address. Wanted to make sure the media focused on that. Wanted to make sure our tech platforms focused on that. We wanted to make sure that our elected officials affirm science and evidence and the facts, and really make sure that leaders, public health leaders, physicians, and scientists, again, could discuss these issues and talk about these issues without fear of retribution. From the very beginning, early on, at the beginning of March, I believe, I had the opportunity to meet with the president, and we met via conference call. We were trying to, as a group of physician leaders, again, model the behavior that we thought was wise at that moment. We decided not to travel to Washington, D.C., and so the group of physician leaders had a conference call with the task force and the administration, and we called early on for making sure we had the PPE that we needed, and we called for the president to invoke and fully invoked and then act on the Defense Production Act to make sure, again, physicians on the front line had the equipment that they needed, not just physicians, of course, all healthcare workers on the front line, and test. I think we all know, and as we sit here today, we are still behind on our testing capacity and strategy, because it's more than just having the test available. But certainly that was something that we've been fighting for the very beginning. We have been elevating physician challenges. I'm sure you can imagine that I and other members in the leadership of the AMA receive feedback and input and stories around the challenges that physicians are facing, not only the physicians on the front line, but of course physicians in their offices. We, physicians, appropriately, certainly scaled back our inpatient visits. Our surgeons scaled back, of course, elective surgeries. so that we could spare PPE, and so that we could make sure that there was hospital bed capacity. But we worked really hard with CMS, along with APA and other organizations, national organizations, to expand access to telehealth, and to make sure that there was payment parity for telehealth visits, and even allow for telephone visits, because again, getting back to issues around inequities, my father is 86 and he has a phone. He doesn't, he's not that tech savvy, and so we wanted to make sure that even phone visits were covered. Now, psychiatrists have been doing telehealth. Other physicians have too for a while. So here we are in the midst of this pandemic, and certainly the use of telehealth has been accelerated. Now, I would say this, and this is another thing we need to add to our to-do list. I would posit that not everything we are doing during the midst of the acute phase of the pandemic we should continue to do. We will need to have thoughtful, evidence-based conversations about what we should continue to do. Again, and there will be things that we should not. Certainly things you do in the crisis might not be appropriate after we get through the crisis. So again, we'll continue to have those conversations, but of course, as physicians, we will have to be at the forefront of those conversations, again, as we get through the acute phase of this. One of the things we wanted to do at the AMA was make sure that physicians had the resources that we need, and I know that other physician organizations did this as well. Certainly we wanted to make sure that we had a resource page for COVID-19, a very easy place for physicians to go to get all of the resources that we were putting out. And this slide just delineates a lot of the resources and just a few. So if you want to go to our website, ama-assn.org/COVID-19, you can see all of the resources that we have available for physicians. And I will tell you here, being a psychiatrist, again, as president, as spokesperson, I've been able to talk a lot about the mental health needs, both of those on the front line, but also of this country and what people are going through. And I often, of course, refer to the work of APA and ACAP and Apple on these things. And so, again, here are some of the many resources that we have developed at the AMA. We've talked about health inequity. I've participated on multiple town halls regarding mental health, regarding health inequities. So again, we wanted to make sure that we were getting credible information out there. We were having thoughtful, science-based and evidence-based conversations around all of these issues. So please, we update these resources as new information comes in. So please, take the opportunity to go to our website. We definitely want to make sure that physicians are supported. I did not talk about our work to make sure that in the bills, the 3 bills that have been passed, we wanted to make sure that there was financial resources for physician practices. Many physician practices, especially those in rural areas or in urban areas or under-resourced areas, were small businesses in their community, hiring staff, paying rents, paying mortgages. And so we wanted to make sure that physicians were able to take full advantage of the PPP loans, and we advocated for grants. And even with the loans, we advocated for more generous interest rates and a longer period to repay some of these loans. So I want you to know that we have been fighting for physicians since the very beginning, and will continue to do so, of course, in partnership with all of you. Again, pointing out all of the issues that you see around surging care demands. Fortunately, we did not get to the point where we were making decisions about who might have access to a ventilator, and we need to make sure we continue to do all that we can to make sure we do not get back to that point. We don't know if this virus will subside over the summer. If it behaves like other viruses, it may decrease over the summer, but we need to make sure we are prepared for a surge in the fall. And let me just bring a little levity to this about me as a psychiatrist talking about all of these other things. During my inaugural address, I opened with the fact that I, again, have been able to be a realization of my ancestors' wildest dreams. And then I joked a little about the fact that the audience couldn't get through a presentation from a psychiatrist without talking about dreams, but I also made sure that they knew that psychiatrists can talk about dreams, but we can also talk about the cytochrome P450 system. So I hope that I've been able to say, yes, we can talk about all of the issues, and I think I got a question once about vivid dreams or nightmares, but we are physicians, just like everyone else, and we can and do appreciate and understand all aspects of medicine. So that's been important. I sorry to say, but this is the way it goes on social media. A couple of comments I got said, "What's the psychiatrist doing talking about the virus?" But certainly we have that capacity. I've already talked about I work for PPE, the Defense Production Act. Because we know that while we've gotten better on both test and PPE, we still need to make sure there is a sustainable supply chain for PPE as people are coming back into offices, as we are needing to do more tests, as we are resuming elective surgeries and other procedures. So we've, again, worked really hard on, again, in partnership with all of medicine on telemedicine guidelines, the PPE and the test kits. New CPT codes needed to be developed, and we did so. We wanted to make sure there was faster reimbursement. And let me just put a point on this last one, because we know that CMS certainly covers Medicare, but a lot of physicians across the spectrum maybe not bill Medicare. Pediatricians, may, of course, don't bill Medicare, and others. And so we have been working, again, with the private insurers as well, encourage Medicaid, which, as everyone knows, is a partnership between the state and the feds, to do the same things, to follow in the footsteps of CMS. Some success on that, but that is another opportunity where state partnerships are critical. Again, as Saul mentioned, I've had the opportunity to make sure we are keeping science at the forefront, and had the opportunity to be on TV, and let's all commit to continuing to do that. If you ever ask for an interview, or even your patients, let's start and end with the science, the evidence, and the facts. And we have to demand this not only of ourselves, we do this, but our elected leaders, as I said, our tech platforms, and again, we have to make sure that we get this information out without fear of retaliation and retribution. Early on, I'm sure you saw that some physicians were, we heard were being fired, or receiving feedback that they should not be talking to the media. And we were out early and saying, listen, physicians should be able to say what's going on. It's factual. Sure, institutions want to have a coherent media approach, but the public already knew, and there should be no punishment or for physicians or other healthcare workers for doing what I said earlier, and that was telling the truth. I've already talked about the health inequities, and what we did there was urge HHS and the CDC to make sure that they were collecting data around race and ethnicity, and also zip code. We need to make sure that we are strategic in getting the resources to the areas that need the resources. We've also talked about the $100 billion. We will continue to fight for financial resources and for advance payments for both Medicare and Medicaid. Let's all remember that we should take care of ourselves as we are taking care of others, and physicians in general, and historically have not been great at that. But this is where the psychiatric community can certainly have a greater impact and make sure we amplify the need for this. So we know, at least I'm optimistic, we are going through a tough time, but I believe that we will get through this time, and that will take all of us working together to get through this time. But there is reason for optimism as long as we are making data-driven decisions, and I hope all of you are helping out your local public health leaders to make sure that we are partnering to get the message across about the testing, the strategy, health inequities, and the need for mental health. So this was a quote on my inaugural program: "If one has courage, nothing can dim the light which science shines from within." So I thank you for the opportunity to present before you today, and I look forward to continuing to working with you as we get through the acute phase again of this pandemic, but also as we move our country and as we move medicine forward. So thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Harris. Hi, I'm Kim Nordstrom. I'm the chair of the Colorado Psychiatric Society Program Committee. And, you know, Dr. Harris, I'll tell you, shortly after Dr. Lazarus's tenure as AMA president, excuse me, he was talking to me about the commitment, just the schedule and all the meetings, and I was worn out just hearing what his year sounded like. And you had COVID on that. I am just so grateful. We all are so grateful that you took out time tonight to spend with us. This is an extra, an added thing that you've agreed to do, and we do truly appreciate it. So thank you.
Well, it has been my pleasure and honor, and hopefully next year or at some point I'll be there and we'll be able to see one another in person.
I love it.
All right.
So I'm switching gears now, and this is the question and answer time for the program. So giving a little instruction to the participants. It's important that you use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen to ask questions. Please don't ask questions in the chat because I'm not going to be looking there. So if you actually want your question asked formally, please put it in the Q&A. We already have 6, which is impressive, but I am going to do what I tend to do and take privilege. Since,
yes.
Yeah, I got the
privilege
short
of the chair. Right.
And so my question is, I've read the AMA position statement on this, but knowing that so many states require for licensure and so many hospitals require for credentialing physicians to write out what diagnoses they've been given or what treatment they've had around mental illness.
Oh, yeah.
How can we encourage healthcare professionals, but very specifically physicians, to get help?
You know, we certainly have to continue to elevate that issue. I'm sure most folks in the audience know. And when I first came to Georgia, many other states were the same. Remember this? The question was, have you ever been treated for a mental disorder? And I remember thinking, there's no way. And this is, we have to be honest about that. And then if you did, you know, attach separate sheets, right? That is not there. That is just a way to not, number one, discriminate, but also discourage help seeking, right? And so now I know that working across the states, I believe that most of the questions are, but I could be mistaken, has your ability to care for patients been impaired? I would say that's a fair question. Because the boards are, you know, certainly we could have a fair mind debate about that. I would say it's a fair question, but we need to dig deeper into that and then look, maybe work with FSMB. I think we need to start early with our medical students to make sure, because there are a lot of things, you know, we say. I'm not sure the action always follows the words. So we have to make sure that we are encouraging help seeking in our medical schools, and that it's routinized, right? I don't even like to use the term normalized, but it's routinized. And we have to start early, I think. I've been talking to a couple of folks who have been providing care for folks who are on the front lines. And one of my colleagues said nobody's calling. Because again, if you have to take the extra effort in the midst of, taking care of the patients on the front, so some of the institutions are having wellness rounds as a part, this is not separate. Here we are at the end of a shift or end of your time, or wellness rounds come, and so we have to routinize that. So I think we have to have all these conversations starting in medical school and really put actions behind our words. If you say that it is okay, if you need to take some time off, or you need to have your mental health needs met. By the way, we have to come up with some new language, but that's another conversation. Then when you miss a rotation or time on the rotation, we have to make sure that attendings don't look askance at that, you know what I mean? So we have to make sure we're having those conversations and that our actions are equitable with our words.
I appreciate that well-thought answer. So I know a lot of us are struggling with that, so thank you. So the first question, and I'll let everybody know if you like one of the questions. So if you go into the Q&A and you hit the thumbs up, the more votes, the higher it goes up in the questions. So if you find a particular question that you wanted to ask yourself, please go ahead and put the thumbs up. All right. So the next question. How do you suggest we as psychiatrists reconcile the fact that there has already been a national shortage in our field, and now the demand is only expected to increase post-COVID or during COVID? Yet, on the other side, we are also seeing so many organizations and institutions facing furloughs, layoffs, and staffing models that are not seemingly suited for the needed mental health financial investment. So we have a lot of need here at a time of economic crunch for hospitals and other organizations. You have thoughts on how to reconcile those two competing interests?
Well, I'm not sure we're going to reconcile, but we're going to have to lead the conversation, and we're going to have to find allies. So I can tell you that I've been looking for, I've been looking for allies and asking the question if someone would have a conversation. Would you be willing to continue this, or are you going to be willing to continue this after we get through this, right? And I've been looking for folks who, yes, I will commit to being a part of the conversation and making sure these issues are addressed. We are, of course, are going to have to lead on that. Certainly telepsychiatry and looking at technology, new ways of doing that while we do our best. But of course, that will take years. So let's just say that, if, funding for residency slots and some of those things are going to take years. So we do have to have sort of a short-term plan and a longer-term plan. We have to have a strategy. But I think we need to convene folks right after this, we get through the acute phase of this, and okay, what are we willing to do? What system changes do we need to make right now, and can we make right now? And what funding commitments can we make right now? And we just have to, raise our hands and at the institution and say, what are we going to do? We'll have to have some accountability partners, right? And I think here's where we can call on the allies, the patient community, but allies who said, oh my goodness, COVID-19 is amplifying the woefully inadequate mental health system. Okay, what are we going to do about it? So I think we'll have to just hold folks accountable to continue to have those conversations.
Sure. And Dr. Harris, you have to know there's a war going on between questions. They keep changing who gets top. So it's kind of funny because people are very excited about some of these questions. So I'll go with the next one that's currently top, and it is someone noted that the Lancet just published an editorial that stated Americans must put someone in the White House in January 2021 who will understand that public health should not be gilded by partisan politics. Will the APA and AMA take the same stand on that?
So I can't speak for the APA. I can speak for the AMA, although I think so. One of the things we have to, as organizations, we are nonpartisan, right? And so it's about policy. It's about who votes for APA policy, whose votes are consistent with AMA policy. So we need to focus on the policy. Let me take off my AMA hat for a second, but I don't even think I have to take off my AMA hat to say this. I learned early, one of the reasons I am here today is because I went to Psychiatrist Day at the Capitol at the Georgia General Assembly at the end of my residency and fellowship year. And I saw firsthand the need for physicians to be involved in making policy. And I was so moved by it that I, for several years, was a full-time lobbyist at the Georgia General Assembly. So I saw it up close and personal. And so my plea since that time and up until now, again, just my personal plea and commitment is you have to be engaged and involved. Now, you don't have to be the president of the APA or the AMA. You don't have to be a full-time lobbyist like I did, but everyone on this call, everyone in our profession needs to, at the very minimum, do two things. Know who your elected officials are. And by the way, that includes the school board, because education, I think we all appreciate that education is a determinant of health, right? And so you need to know who your elected officials are. Now, again, there are a lot, so I won't say that you have to know them all, but you have to know your Congress folks and your state folks, and you should send them an email at least once a year and say, I'm Dr. Harris, and I know you get medical issues and you might not know, you might not have the facts. I want to be a resource. And so that is the very minimum, in my opinion. This is my personal opinion. AMA doesn't have policy on this. That is the very minimum that every physician needs to do. And I will say, and vote. Don't care who you vote for. But you have to vote, and then you have to continue to engage. So that's how we should be involved in politics, by exercising, and again, this is my personal opinion, exercising our individual right to vote, number one, and number two, making sure that we are engaged with our elected officials.
And I very much appreciate the very practical advice in that, what each and every one of us can do as individuals. So thank you. The next question.
I will say one more thing, but it was clear, and if you read the transcript of that address that I gave through the National Press Club, we were clear that we did call on elected officials to affirm science and the evidence and facts, and to make data-driven decisions, and to let the public health folks. So we've been clear on that, and I was clear that if you want the transcript of that address, I'm sure it's available.
Thank you. Thank you. The next question, telepsychiatry is here to stay given the history of the pandemic. Does the AMA have plans to normalize this practice to break down practice barriers? You've talked a fair amount about, that telepsychiatry is here. Any thoughts on practice barriers?
Yeah, and let me just say, because I get questions a lot about the AMA's policy, and look, we have a lot of policy at the AMA, just like you all make policy there, and we can't. I could read our policy compendium, but it's probably this thick. So I would encourage anyone, if anyone ever wonders, I wonder what the AMA thinks about that, go to our website, go to our policy finder, and you can see what we think about that. And speaking of telehealth and telemedicine, we have wonderful policy regarding breaking down barriers for telehealth and telemedicine. I remember I think early on in my tenure at the AMA, I was on the council, in my tenure leadership, I was on the council on legislation, and we developed guidelines and best practice principles of how, and of course we've come a long way since then, so we are very active and engaged in reducing the barriers. Now let me just say this about telemedicine and my comment earlier about we shouldn't, well, let me just say this. Telemedicine, like any other new thing, telemedicine is not that new, is not a panacea. So sometimes, you know, we, again, the latest thing, oh my goodness, look how great telemedicine is. We found how great telemedicine is during the course of the COVID-19 pandemic. Absolutely, telemedicine helped us increase access to care while we were able to decrease risk of infection. But again, it's not a one-size-fits-all approach. I've been doing telemedicine, like I'm sure most people on the call. Some of my patients don't prefer it. My patient said, Dr. Harris, I prefer seeing you in person. Some of the things we miss with telemedicine, I told this story, that when I go to the waiting room, I walk back to the office with my patients. I'm watching their gait. I'm sure all psychiatrists are doing this because some of the medications that we put folks on may affect their gait, you know, their movement, their muscle tone. And so I'm looking, you know, at their neck. You know, we're doctors and seeing if I see a large, enlarged thyroid. So I just want to say, I want us to all, telemedicine is wonderful. I'm a big fan. We have to make sure that it improves patient outcomes, right? And it's not just the thing to do, just because it's the thing to do. And we will have to, you know, make sure that it's integrated, in my opinion, into healthcare. What I worry about, I don't know what others worry about, is it has the potential to further fragment care, right? It has the potential to leave out those without broadband and without data plans. So we will have to, of course, absolutely telemedicine. The AMA has a lot of principles on artificial intelligence. We call it augmented intelligence. So we as a physician community are going to have to work hard and be on the forefront and be proactive in leading on all of this. But certainly telemedicine is not a panacea.
And as you noted, you know, it allows for new discrimination, right, and economic discrimination.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, good point. The next question. One heartbreak.
Oh, and we of course, we care about this privacy and confidentiality. So, and if anyone has not seen, AMA just released new privacy principles, I think about 3 days ago, and we really elevated, you know, the importance of making sure we have conversations about privacy and confidentiality on the front end, and not after, you know, we've had some breach or something terrible happen to our patients. And patients with all of the data breaches and the privacy and confidentiality, who's using my data, and how do I know what folks are using my data to do? We found that patients, there was a study, I think Rock Health and Stanford Digital Health Center, I might not have that exactly right, did a study that patients are becoming less willing to share data that we as physicians may need. So that's one of the many reasons we put forth those privacy principles on. Did I lose you? Okay. Okay.
Okay, so sorry, I muted myself because a family decided to walk by. I have an open window, and you know, they were social distancing because I'm quite far from them, but they were quite loud, and I guess I can't unmute myself, so I won't do that again.
You know, that I meant to say this at the very beginning. You know, I'm sure all of us, and those, especially those of us who treat children, but I think everyone would do this. Social media had become a place where everybody would put their best, their perfect selves that don't exist forward, right? And I think one of the learnings that I think this has been good, this is my personal opinion, is in the beginning, you know, Zoom and everybody still, you know, maybe put on lipstick or makeup or whatever they did. But I think, I don't know if I've seen people say, you know what, it doesn't matter. We don't have to be perfect anymore. We can be more authentic on that. So I think that's, you know, one of the things I think a good learning from where we are now. So yes, so babies have come, children have come in, families have walked by, you know, it's life.
Right, right. Well, I guess I'm definitely authentic then. I shut my window. All right. The next question. One heartbreaking story I have heard is from a physician at our hospital. He was devastated because his neighbors are not allowing their children to see or ride bikes with his young daughter, especially because her dad is an ICU doc. What can we do to combat this new fear of and stigma towards health professional?
Yeah, I've heard those stories too, and so I know we all know this as psychiatrists. So first of all, we understand the fear, right? And there's a lot of uncertainty, and people are dying. So there's a fear. And so I would say the way we combat fear is with information. Now that's an individual case, and I'm sure there are a lot of individual issues around that, but I'll just bring it up to a broader case, is making sure we have the information. So when there's an opportunity, is it riskier? Listen, if somebody's working on the front line or essential workers, same thing, they are more exposed. So we have to, admit that piece. And if someone is worried, maybe then that's when we can be creative, like New York and Colorado have done a creative. How can maybe they can't ride bikes. Maybe that person's not not comfortable with that, but maybe they could figure out something else to do. Again, we'll start with the virtual play date, and then maybe after you get comfortable with that, move closer. So I think it's just evidence, science, evidence, and meeting people where they are, which is what we do all the time.
It's a real challenge.
I am worried. I think all of us are worried about the children. There are no perfect answers here, of course. There never are, but we of course could not. People are slowly loosening restrictions now, but let's just say a month ago, we couldn't just say, oh, let's just keep the kids in school. We just couldn't do it. And there are consequences to that. Now, I believe that, so that's the first thing you say, there are consequences, and then you figure out, okay, what can we do to mitigate those consequences? Not eliminate them, can't do that, but, and those are local, I think, partnerships that can help with that. But as a child psychiatrist, I'm worried about the children, but I want to channel my worry into action.
Well, we can appreciate that. The next question. Your comments on self-care for physicians is well taken. Many programs are focusing on wellness, yet I find when I speak to early career professionals and trainees, there's a high level of cynicism and mistrust. For example, many times the sentiment that a focus on burnout misses critical issues and understates the scope of the problem. Here's the question. Do you have any thoughts you'd like to share about how this issue may come to the fore and potentially be improved due to the current COVID crisis?
Yeah, I do, and I'm glad someone made the point about burnout, and AMA's done a lot of work on burnout, and usually I include burnout, when I'm face-to-face and have a longer presentation and talking about the work of the AMA on other non-COVID issues. We do talk about burnout a lot and the work that we've done, and the fact, by the way, we make this point that burnout is not the physician's fault, right? And so, yes, we should all sleep more and eat better and exercise more, but that every physician could do that, and that won't solve burnout. We know that burnout is mostly externally caused, right? All the rules, all the regulations, the systemic issues, which is why the AMA has been working really hard to address those systemic issues. I think that people sometimes do not differentiate between burnout and mental disorders. And of course, I've been asked this, well, isn't burnout a trendy way or a less stigmatizing way of saying depressed? And we cannot let that happen, and I think psychiatrists need to lead that conversation. Burnout is not the same, and we should always make sure it's not the same, and we should not, if we see folks are sort of blurring the lines between the two, no, we should call it out and say they are different. And we want to call out, and if we are not addressing mental disorders in our students and trainees, then we have work to do. So we have to call out, make sure that people are having different conversations. They could overlap, right? But they are different, and we need strategies that are different to address each, and make sure that people are not blurring the two. I've found actually the younger students are very eager to address this issue, at least students and residents that are active at the AMA and around the country. And I've been very eager to address this issue, have less reticence about sharing this, although what they say is they're not sure if they share it, sometimes the follow-on is not as robust. So everybody's saying, yes, share it and be open and it's okay, but I was talking about this earlier, the follow-on is not robust. So that's again, all of our problems to solve.
Right. It's akin to what we were talking about earlier with why physicians may not seek treatment, right? Because then having to be exposed to it later. Same thing here. If they're trying to put a yellow flag, red flag around burnout, and then almost possibly even having a negative response.
Right.
That's the worst thing that could happen, it sounds like, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And some other areas at the AMA, of course, we partner with AAMC and ACGME, and we have our Accelerating Change in Medical Education program, and we really call that out and are working with the medical schools. And of course, we started out with 11 medical schools with $1 million grants, and then we amplified that into a larger consortium so that medical schools could learn from one another. And now we're making sure that the medical schools that are not involved in the consortium have the opportunity to learn what the medical schools in our consortium are learning. And so that has been a point that we've highlighted in our work on education at the AMA.
Oh, that's great. Thank you. All right, I'll go to the next question. My concern is that mental and behavioral health needs have continued unchecked during COVID-19. Most programs I know have risen to reach the mental health needs in many formats: telehealth, inpatient, outreach to primary care. With the looming fiscal crisis in our institutions, how do you see our folks who have already been working nonstop give more as asked by our institutions?
Well, I think those are the conversations that institutions are going to have, hopefully right at the beginning of whatever period is appropriate for the institution. And that's where I think psychiatrists can lead and say, let's, there is, at some point, maybe there's no more, right? And I think this is part of the issue of the ethos of the profession is we will give more and more and more and more. And really, we need to say, at one point, no, this is all we can do without more resources. And so, sometimes you have to say no. And now, and here, certainly I know that's easier said than done. And hopefully leaders, and this is where we're hoping, and certainly APA and AMA can share in this and making sure, just as I believe that the work that we did at the AMA elevated the burnout question from, because remember, originally burnout was doctors, just eat better and sleep more. AMA and Stanford, a lot of others, not just us, elevated that conversation to where we had the CEOs of the huge institutions in our country, some of the most notable institutions. I hate to name them because I might forget one, but the big, well-known institutions in our country had a roundtable and said, yes, this is a problem. And look, you have to quantify the problem in many ways. For some huge institutions, they realize that to replace physicians or to do some of these things, or time off and presenteeism and absenteeism costs money. And I'm not saying that those folks did not realize the other issues, but they also appreciated the financial impact, the fiscal impact of not addressing burnout. And so we will continue to make sure we elevate the fiscal impact of not addressing mental health needs. That is part of the work that we can be engaged in. It won't be ours alone to do. But so when you're going to the institutions and mentioning that, we also need to come with the data about the cost of not addressing these needs. And I think, you know, I know they get it in patients, I can't remember which institution, but they looked at the fact of not addressing depression after a particular procedure, after a CABG, or so, I can't remember, and there have been other data on this. Patients stay in the hospital longer, you know, and so we have to make sure we come armed with that information.
Yeah. You've been quite the trooper. I'm so appreciating you sticking with us to answer all these questions. I have time for one more question. Okay. So I'm going to go to the head of the list with 3 thumbs up. The question is, what, if anything, can the AMA do to elevate the voice of the CDC during this pandemic? I think people trust the CDC and may be confused about its relative silence in the public sphere right now.
Well, I believe that our words, and we just need to keep repeating these words, but that is one of the reasons I am just so proud of, it's not me, but the AMA and our coming out with that address on science and evidence and the fact, and I think in that speech, but if not in that speech, in others, I've specifically called out the need to let CDC, let NIH, let WHO, all these organizations, again, geopolitical issues with WHO, that's over here. What are the science issues? And this is a global pandemic. We need a global partner. So we continue to speak out loud and say that our scientific institutions, first of all, need support. They need financial support. Now, we know that maybe over the last several years, those institutions, particularly CDC, and public health in general, you know, public health in some ways is like mental health, woefully underfunded and under-resourced for the last decade, right? And so we'll have to make sure that, first of all, the next round of funding is clear. All of us who don't work in government, also need to use our platforms to talk about the importance of letting our scientific institutions speak without fear of retaliation and retribution. I know that was a line in my speech, and lead on this conversation. And that's what we can do externally.
Dr. Harris, any last words that you'd like to say to these 2 very interested societies? And actually, we have some other groups with us tonight that I'll be noting a little later. Any last words for us?
Well, you know, I was a health director here in Fulton County several years ago, and of course, I'm a psychiatrist, and I didn't have any formal public health training. Of course, a lot of other training, but not formal, no MPH. And someone asked me what best prepared me for leadership in that role and other roles. And I have said on many occasions, my training as a psychiatrist. So I want all the psychiatrists in the audience to know that our training prepares us for leadership. And let's lead. But you can lead every day in your practice, in your community, or you can lead as the president of a state society, the chair of the program committee, the president of the AMA and the APA. You can lead by running for office. But whatever we do, let's use a training that I think that we have, a great training that really prepares us to lead. Let's make sure we lead.
Thank you. That's excellent. I appreciate that. All right. I saw a couple of chats come in, and I wasn't sure if it was one of those private ones that I had to pay attention to.
Yes.
All right.
Thank you all for this wonderful opportunity, and stay safe. Wear a mask. Let's model wearing face coverings and practicing physical distancing while staying socially connected.
Thank you. Thank you. And to everyone, I really want to thank you for joining us this evening. We appreciate your support and engagement during these challenging times. A special thank you to Anna Weaver Hayes and Megan O'Toole and the teams of the New York City as well as Colorado Psych Society. We also want to mention that Denver Medical Society, Colorado Medical Society, and the University of Colorado Department of Psychiatry came together with us tonight. So this was a very exciting evening. We also want to also thank our sponsors. Without you guys, either we wouldn't have this or it would have been a heck of a lot more expensive to the participants. So, you know, a big thank you. We hope that you can join us at our next event, which is May 27th. Please look in the chat. There's a link to register for that event in the chat. At this point, have a good night, everyone, and stay healthy.